Welcome to Civil War Digital Digest. I'm Will. Well, it's a fun day. We get to come back to see our friends Jeremy and Felicia here at History Acres, and today we're going to talk about one of their heritage breeds here. Before we get into that, Felicia, tell me a little bit about the mission behind History Acres.
Yeah, so we started our farm really in 2019, and our big goal is preserving history. So we try to have breeds that are endangered in some way or form, that are on the Livestock Conservancy list and are some of the oldest breeds in America.
And which breed are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about the Dominique chicken, which is the oldest chicken breed here in America.
The oldest. Okay, Jeremy, you and I have done history for more than a decade together. I don't know these birds really well. Walk me through it.
The history of the Dominiques is interesting because they're considered the first American breed of chicken. So we think about all of the different breeds that we have today. If they were developed in the United States, then you trace them back, you're probably going to find a Dominique chicken there at the beginning of it. The origin story is, I guess, tricky only because they've been here so long. They just always been here. That's their origin story. So sometimes they're referred to as the pilgrim chicken. So they said, hey, they came over with the pilgrims. They came over with the original colonists. So they've just always been here. So when we talk about colonial America through the United States of America, the Dominique has been with us.
What I love from a history nerd standpoint is I found a quote in a 1908 article that said that the Dominique was the bird, basically the crow that woke up Washington's army at Valley Forge. That there was a farm that was near Valley Forge that was known to always have Dominiques. They had been raising them there. And so Washington's army was hearing the Dominique crowing.
Well, given what I've read about the food source at Valley Forge, I'm surprised they got woke up at all after a couple of days.
Yep.
And during our shared bit of history with the 1860s, the Civil War era, they're all over farms across the country. They might be called a Dominique, they might be called a Dominiquer, depending on the region that you're in, but they're probably a barnyard bird, and they're also being showed at shows at that point. Poultry shows became really popular starting in the late 1840s and moving forward. So not only were they being still kept for the original purpose of this great farm bird, but also people are fanciers of Dominiques, fancier being someone that is very dedicated to the selective chicken breeding and showing of these chickens. You know, talking about a farmyard bird, we're looking at a chicken that's allowed to really be a chicken. They're probably running around free range most likely. So I would say sun on their backs, dirt under their feet. They're foraging for their food predominantly. You know, a farmer might throw them some cracked corn, some table scraps, some stale bread, and things like that. But not like today where it's like, for us, we always have dedicated bins that the chickens have a balanced diet that they can go to, but they'd rather forage anyway. And the farmer would have counted on that. So the feed costs were extremely low. They didn't cost a lot to raise. And then they could produce income for that family through the sale of eggs or maybe even the sale of some meat birds.
Well, let's talk about these birds. Felicia, before we go in, Jeremy said two things here in the history that I think you should address for so many people who aren't at a farm. He said breed standards and he said APA. Can you briefly talk to me about these two things?
The APA is the American Poultry Association, and they're kind of who handles the breed standards today. And a breed standard is really the guidelines for your breed. What they look like, kind of the colors, the shapes, what type of comb they have, and things like that.
Great. Well, seeing where that is, let's talk about the Dominiques as we hear them talking about us. So
Yeah.
When you look at a Dominique, what are we looking for in a breed standard?
Let's talk about kind of the breed standard and how that's changed. On the Civil War farm, a Dominique chicken could have actually had a rose comb, or it could have had a single comb. But they created a new standard for that, and that's the barred rock. A rose comb are these shorter combs that you can kind of see in this picture, and they're going to be a lot shorter. For a single comb, they stick straight up and have points coming off of them, and they're a lot taller. You don't really get this definition of a Dominique chicken having a rose comb until the 1870s, when chicken breed kind of standards start to develop. We'll start and we'll kind of go from head to toe. So for the Dominique, you're going to have a rose comb, which is a flatter comb, and they're really great for northern climates because Since they're smaller, they're less likely to get frostbite. And then they're going to have kind of a reddish colored eyes. They should have a yellow beak. And then their feathers should be white and black barred. But they're not going to be super even barring. For the Dominiques, they're going to be very irregular barring. For the males are going to be a bit lighter in color than the females. The white on their barring is going to be a little bit wider. Barring, when you're looking at the Dominique, is the alternating of the black and the white coloring on their feathers. The great part about barring really is that it's almost kind of like camouflage and helps them hide from predators.
Well, you mentioned the barred Plymouth Rock as we got near the end of the breeds standard, and you said this is more one, the Dominique's another. How do these two breeds relate to each other?
Yeah, so the earliest barred rocks are really a cross between the two breeds of chickens we have here, which are Dominiques and Black Java chickens. So the barred rock is going to have the single comb, it's going to have more defined barring and things like that, whereas the Dominique has the jagged barring like we were talking about in the rose comb. The Dominique is really the ancestor of the Plymouth Rock.
We've now brought in another breed, the Plymouth Barred Rock, which is something a lot of people have heard if they've looked at chickens, but we don't know about Dominiques. Yeah. Why is that?
The Dominique really kind of starts to see its downfall kind of in the later 1800s. It sees an upsurgence in the Great Depression because they're easy keepers, great farm birds, cheap to feed. And then they decline again because of commercialization, and they're replaced by their descendants. The Barred Rock takes off and replaces them.
Okay, why does commercialization, why are they replaced by commercialization? What does this bird do well and what does it not do as well as something else?
Yeah, so talking about the commercialization, the Plymouth Barred Rock really was created because they wanted the Dominique to become larger, grow faster, and then even produce more and more eggs, which the Plymouth Barred Rock does. And thinking a little bit about how the Plymouth Barred Rock started to replace them, actually also goes back to those breed standards that Felicia was just talking about, because they wanted to really differentiate. So we talked about straight comb and rose comb. Barred Rocks have a straight comb, Dominiques have a rose comb. Well, at one time, pre-1871, it was perfectly fine to have a Dominique with a straight comb. There's actually even some research that suggests that a straight comb Dominique hen is more fertile than the rose comb. And back in even 1851 in the poultry book talks about how the fact they could have a rose comb or a straight comb. But in 1871, when the standards were laid out, it was realized that we need to have a way to really distinguish between the Plymouth Barred Rock and the Dominique. Well, what are we going to do? Well, besides barring, which is not as obvious necessarily, we go with the combs. So then suddenly all straight comb Dominiques are wrong, and they very easily then are just considered, that's a Plymouth Barred Rock. So you just lost an entire chunk of the population of Dominiques. They're now just being called Plymouth Barred Rocks. And then because of the commercialization, a Dominique lays around 230 eggs a year. Now you're talking today, we're well over 300 eggs a year.
With modern breeds.
With modern breeds, and the Plymouth Rock is what's perpetuating that forward. More eggs, faster development, larger body structure. That's what started replacing the Dominique.
Well, what do we expect out of a Dominique today? What do we expect for size? What do we expect for eggs? When you have a hen born, how long do you think you need to raise it before you would want to minimally harvest?
For the Dominiques, your males are going to be 7 pounds and your females should be around 5. And really, they hit that somewhere after about 26 weeks. And that is a fully grown Dominique bird. So for the eggs for the Dominiques, they're going to be a medium-sized egg. You're going to get somewhere between 230 and 275 a year on average. With ours, because we let them free range, they're going to be a much darker orange in the yolk. And they're going to be a little bit richer in flavor because they really prefer to free range and eat the grass and the bugs and whatnot, rather than just sit and eat feed, and that improves their egg quality and flavor.
And then for meat, there's a lot more dark meat on these chickens because they have a lot longer legs, they have smaller breasts. And if you're doing period cooking, you may notice if you make a recipe with store-bought eggs, that your recipe, if it has a lot of egg in it, tastes really eggy. And that's a difference in size of egg. We did a custard one time, and it literally just tasted like scrambled eggs, and we couldn't understand what happened. And now that we started raising these chickens, we see really we should have been using a medium-sized egg, and then making it with a medium-sized egg, it tastes much more like it should have.
Have you gone back and remade it yet?
Yeah, and it's a lot better.
All right, if we're using this doesn't surprise me, if we're using a 19th century bird, the cooking technique is probably going to be a little bit different than going down to the store and picking it up at the grocery store.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, if you look in 19th century cookbooks, especially earlier 19th century, so, think about the famous Kentucky Housewife, Virginia Housewife, different books like that, and you flip through, you'll see it talking about using a roaster chicken and using a fryer.
What's the difference?
Yeah, they're not just talking about a technique there. They're actually talking about the size of the bird. And part of that is age. So a fryer is going to be a younger bird, so it's going to be more tender. So you can cook it quick and fast, such as frying it, right? Fried chicken. A roaster is going to be a larger bird, but it's going to be an older bird, so you want a little more low and slow, like roasting. So really, by cooking Dominiques that are dual purpose, meant for eggs and meat, they both do well with both of those. I like to look back at these 19th century or earlier cookbooks and use the techniques that they were using based off of the age of the bird. But you pop that in the oven for 2 to 3 hours, depending on the size of the bird, at 300 degrees, low and slow. You won't ever want to go back to grocery store chicken. It's just amazing. The flavor, it tastes like chicken. And it might have a little bit more of a chew, but just a lot more flavor.
Why this breed for this farm?
Yeah, so really why this breed is the same reason our ancestors chose it. They're great at foraging. They're really self-sufficient. They'll raise their own young. We have a little mama hen right now with 2 babies running around. She's teaching them how to forage. It's one of my favorite things to watch. The roosters help with that too, with this breed. Whereas modern breeds today, a lot of people tell you not to let your roosters around your baby chicks. But these guys have the chicks eating at their feet, the mama hens just running around with them, and the roosters don't bother them. So it's a fun time.
Yeah, and thinking about, so some people want to be able to free range their chickens like we do, and there's some risks involved with that with predators. What we've read and knock on wood experienced is the Dominiques do really well. Not only do they love to forage, they would rather be out in the grass and finding their own food than they would be sitting at a feeder, which is why the feed input is so much lower. But they're also very predator aware. The roosters know how to be roosters. Their head's on a swivel. They're looking out for their flock. And then the barring acts as camouflage as well. So they're really great at being able to be out there and free ranging and be a little bit safer because they still have those natural instincts and that barring to help them out.
Great. Well, I know you guys are part of a larger organization helping preserve different heritage breeds. Why don't we introduce them and talk about their role a little bit here?
Yeah, so really we got introduced to the heritage breeds we got on the internet and we were looking for them. We put in, historic chicken breeds and things like that. And the organization that pops up is the Livestock Conservancy. And their big thing is preserving historic heritage breeds for the future for various purposes, genetic diversity and just to, keep them around. We don't want more breeds going extinct. And so we got on there and we looked at their chicken breeds and we found the Dominiques. We already had known we wanted Javas before that. But then we found the Dominiques and we're like, well, if we're going to have America's second oldest chicken breed, we might as well as have America's oldest chicken breed too.
So how does history fit into preservation of the breed here?
Well, as the Dominique was fading away into history and we get to, the 1970s when they were considered virtually extinct. There was like 4 flocks left. Well, we get to 1976 and American patriotism is at all-time high. We need to save and preserve and celebrate everything that was the revolutionary time. And hey, there's this bird that existed during that time. And we just realized there's a couple of flocks left. We need to save them. And I think that really helped bring them back forward into history. So that saving effort started with some dedicated individuals that started to take some of those Dominiques that were still considered as pure as they were known to be at that time and started breeding them and started, sharing them and trying to advertise and get them out into more farms again. Some different clubs sprang up around saving the Dominique and dedicated to breeding the Dominique. One of those still exists today. The Dominique Club of America is still around. So they're continuing to fight that fight to have that visible presence out there for this breed. There's also a gentleman named Mark Field that did a lot of research and writing and shared the knowledge that he gathered with people. And he even worked with a very large national hatchery to develop a Dominique that was of standard that could be easily shipped out. And that probably did a lot to raise them from a critical to a threatened to now a watch status, which is one of the best statuses to have if you're still on the endangered list with the Livestock Conservancy.
Okay. Well, if somebody wanted to join you guys in the effort today, what's your recommendation to somebody looking at starting with Dominiques?
Get on the Livestock Conservancy. They have a great area where you can look up breeders in the area and see if there's someone near you that has Dominiques. Talk to them, see the chickens, and get some of your own.
Great.
It's so important to save this piece of history. I mean, by having a breed of animal like the Dominique, I was thinking you literally have living history right there. You can taste the food like your ancestors would have tasted it. You can raise a bird like your ancestors would have raised the birds. And it's important to save breeds like this, not only for that history, but also so genetic diversity within our food supply. Each bird like this that's lost, it can be lost forever. And that eventually could impact something into the future by not having that genetic diversity available to us.
Well, there's a compelling argument right there and a compelling call. Thank you both for sharing this story with us and for hosting us today.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming out.
Thank you for spending your time with Civil War Digital Digest. I think we see here, Jeremy said it, living history, and not uniforms or trappings, but actually living beings whose ancestors look the same as they do now. If you get a chance, this is a great way to find a connection, whether it's visiting a farm and seeing Dominiques or getting a chance to try the food that tastes the same way as your ancestors tasted it. Give it a try, find a connection. We'll see you next time.